Welcome to Think and Tackle podcast. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Today, I'm joined in the studio by carp angling historian and all-round legend, Chris Ball. And Chris is on his second visit to the Think and Tackle podcast. Quite a privilege, Chris, but we are delighted to have you back.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I believe only people like Danny and Daryl's that have done to. God knows what you see in me, but, you know, I'm back.
Chris, you are the conduit through which we access carp fishing's rich history, I'm sure.
What a great line. I'm going to use that one.
I made that. I know, made it up.
I just want to say, Rich, before we start, he gave a brilliant... We've got, Chris, you'll have to correct me if I've used the wrong terms here, but we've got an old fishing rod here. That's about as far as my terminology goes.
Right.
And you gave a great... Rich called it Antiques Roadshow kind of introduction, which I thought was very impressive. Do you want to tell everyone watching a little bit about it? Because I found it quite impressive.
Okay, all right. This happened, not all the time, but I get quite a bit of this. I mean, on the telephone, or certainly where I'm at a show or something like that, and people, no, I don't mind, it's great. I like to see the rods themselves. The rod I just looked at now is from Dawson's of Bromley. They were a husband and wife company from way back. He was a master rod builder. They had other people obviously working there as well, and they produced a load of rods, including in split cane. And that one is a river rod, or give it the old fashion expression, a bottom rod. I don't know what they would call that. A three-piece river rod called the Sabrina. They are about, though you do see them around. This is a rod that would have been manufactured in the 50s. And, but the condition of that is good. That's what's good. And it's got a maker's rod bag as well. So that's always nice to have something complete, because often the rod bags get missing or get eaten, or something like that. Nice rod.
And I think this is kind of why, to answer your question, this is why we do love to have you back, because you know more about our history than most, and it's a shrinking pool of knowledge, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh yeah, dead right. I keep extensive files. By the way, and I also keep up-to-date files as well, just so everybody knows. Because not a lot of people know this. I know it's the Michael Caine line, but I, for years, kept the £40 list, and it was published yearly in Carp Talk in the Christmas edition. And in the end, it became so out of control, massive. I mean, I can't remember what year I finished, but I mean, that year there was like 700 odd individual captures, not individual fish, but individual captures of £40 carp. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'll put it where it's manageable, not £50. I'll put it up a notch, £60. Oh my God. I just updated like last week. Are you ready for this, everybody? Sit down. Currently, we are at least 164 individual captures in the UK of £60 plus carp. It's an unreal statistic. Amazing. And that, at least, so there's some I won't know. I get to hear on the grapevine and stuff like that. So keeping the records from way back, I keep that one current.
Yeah. And what I want to discuss today, Chris, is the legacy of what many people believe to have been the single most important strain of carp ever to grace the nets of anglers in this country, and that is the Leney carp.
Yeah.
Can be quite a divisive kind of thing to talk about, one strain being better than another, and we're going to cover that kind of thing, but there's an awful lot of myth around Leney, and I want to bust some of that myth. I want to dig deep into Leney's legacy and Leney's history and what we do know about this man, who I think it's fair to say shaped the sport that we now enjoy.
He was for a long time the main importer of carp, small carp, into this country. Yes, it is. It's something that I only really became aware of only about 40 years ago. It was only through once Chris Yates had caught the record carp in 1980, June 16th in the evening. Everybody should know that. At 51.5 pounds, so Redmar produced the first 30, 40 and 50 pound carp in this country. But it was only, and he lived, Leney was still alive then, though the business had closed. But he lived quite close to Chris. So this is when Chris lived at Hindhead. Only Yatesy could have an address in the Devil's Punch Bowl. About that. It's fantastic. And it is a huge, massive depression in the ground there. So I don't know how deep it is. But he lived on the slopes of that, and it's not very far from Hazelmere, which is where Donald Leney's business had always, certainly since he became involved, had always been based. And it was only Chris writing to him saying that you'd perhaps be delighted to know that I've caught a 50 pound carp from Redmar Pool, a place that you originally, and so that relationship grew, and he invited Chris to go to beautiful house called Springhead. It's still there behind. It's gated now, but beautiful lead light windows. Beautiful place. I've been I've looked at it from the outside.
You've done the Leney tour.
I've done the Leney
and
tour.
Some. You've done Leney tour and some, haven't you? You've been to
Nailsworth, which is in Gloucestershire, which was part of a subsidiary of the Surrey Trout Farm. Been to the trout, the ponds are still there, and this whole my interest and lots of other people's interests started when Chris really started talking to Donald Leney. Now, Kevin Clifford and Len Arbery had 10 years before that, when they were formulating or trying to put together the Redmar Pool book. Though they never saw him personally, Kevin in particular had long correspondence, and letters back, and formed the groundwork for what was published eventually in Redmar Pool, the book. So we had a bit there, and it was that was all interesting then. It stated from Poland the fish came, and then they went to this incredible company called the Highland Massey, and then that Leney went to every autumn to pick up his requirements, and then he started talking about to Chris. He said, for instance, in the locality of Hazelmere, he said, I put fish into Frensham Ponds. Have you heard of that? And Chris said, well, yeah, I've heard of Frensham Ponds. Nothing to do with carp, but he'd heard of Frensham Ponds, and Shillinglee, not far away, again, not really to do with carp. And he said, well, actually, I've got copy invoice books of all our transactions from, when I became involved, which is about the mid-20s. And these were huge, great, sort of 13 by 8 inches. That is. Copy invoice book. I've got one here, here's a page from one of them. And it was like Pandora's box. Well, this is the most exciting moment you can have. As I kind of see you and Yatesy as at this moment, like the Indiana Jones of the carp world. Like all of a sudden, you've got Redmar has happened. Yeah. We all know how important that was, and yet you have now got the keys to the kingdom. Yep. There's this book full of potential hundreds of other Redmires. Yep. Take us back to the excitement of that moment, Chris. Right. Okay. All right. I lived quite close to Chris then in Guildford, and saw a fair bit of him, fishing together odd times, stuff like that. And he told me, he rang me one day and said that about these books. Well, he mentioned Frensham to start with. I said, well, no, I haven't heard anything to do with carp. This is 1980. and Shillingly and so on and so forth. But he said he's got these copy invoices, and he's going to sort. When I go next, he perhaps monthly, I think he went for high tea. Leney had a housekeeper, and she used to make a nice tea with a cake and all that. It was all very formal, and he said, "Yeah, I'll just sort of let you know." Oh, that sounds exciting. I had no idea really what they were, and then the next time he went, Chris rang. He said, he's let me have 5 or 6 of these to look at. What they're like, they're fantastic. I'm looking through. I've already found 1 or 2 places that I was sure there was ancient carp in them, and it's here. So I mean, and he gets very excited, Chris. Anyway,
I imagine the two of you together at this moment would have been combustible.
Absolutely. Yeah. So quick as a flash, I went over there. This house that he lived in, the Devil's Punch Bowl, was a totally wooden house, wooden roof, sides, everything. Badgers used to come up to the back door and stuff like that. It was in the period where he was producing children. He only had to sneeze in front of Claire and she became pregnant. It was that period where the children ended up with, all these kids in this house. And I'd been, a number of times there. But when I went on this occasion, when he had got these volumes, it was in the evening, I remember, and I think I arrived possibly in darkness. I think Claire was, when he was married to Claire, somewhere in the house, and it was quiet. It's one of those places, bit like BB's house that I once went to. They are silent, other than somewhere you can hear a clock. Somewhere, or Radio 4 in the background, and that's exactly what it was like in this house in Whitmore Vale, which is just in the Devil's Punch Bowl. And he had in that house, he had an old-fashioned scullery, a kitchen. He had a wood burner in the side, and a little table in the front. It was great. It was lovely, and we'd sit in there and talk. I mean, talk loads of times. It's the same talk every time. Tell me about the red mine monsters, And of course, Jason's got a fund of them, hasn't he? And most of them are in his head. I mean, whether it happened or not, I don't know. But I mean, it's not rose-tinted glasses with Chris. It's much, much more. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's fibbing or anything like that. But great stories, and. Days of drinking as well. When I think about it now, port. And I mean, I was 35 minutes away. Terrible driving, And we used to sit in there and talk. When I got there that evening, right, I noticed that the Susie put them on the table, and they were in a used condition, as you can imagine, but. Chris, I found out later, put post-it notes in certain pages, the yellow bits sticking out. And they're still, when I passed over some of them eventually to Mark Walshingham, they still had the post-it notes in there. And these are ones that Chris had was either hugely interested in or already possibly knew about, right? And I remember him saying, "Look at this one here." He said, "This is just a bike ride away up the hill and down the other side," and that was Wagner's Wells.
Which actually had Leney fish alive in it until relatively recent times, didn't it?
Absolutely. I managed to catch several myself. Only until not until 1972. I'd been there, I think, the year before. It was a fantastic place. It was in a deep hollow, and it was, especially in the mornings, the mist. It was ethereal. It was one of them ethereal places. And one afternoon, late in the afternoon, I remember somewhere someone was playing a violin way up in the hill, and I mean it was, and this carp floating about, lots of, mainly between above £15, a lot of them. 15 and eventually, there was one big one that went over £30. But I tried on floating crust, tried on worm, I couldn't catch them. Chris, very kindly, it's one of the biggest mistakes I've ever done in carp fishing. Slightly going off, so it's all to do with Leney fish. When he came back from Redmire in 1972 after using only half that can of sweet corn in his omelette and then showing to Hutchinson, what do you reckon of this, Rod? Worth a try, Geez, went off. I mean, these were like smaller ones, but he had, I don't know, 4 or 5 runs that day. God blimey. He told, and then he started to get it in 1972. Later on, he started, and he told me about sweet corn straight away. He said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, out of a tin, yeah, just throw in a few handfuls." When I went to Agnes Wells, first time I used it, and in a spot under this big tree in the shallow area, I threw some, no fish about. It was quite shallow. I threw some back. You could see them shining bright in the water, less than 2 foot deep. And I'm looking around, and there was nobody there except me. It's not a big lake, and like a mini Redmire. And so I walked up. When I came back, that wonderful, slightly milky coloured water was there. I thought, blimey, what's that? And sure enough, out came a fish. On the float, and I caught one, a 14-pounder. I've got a picture of it because it was the Ludshot Common Committee of the National Trust, National Trust Place, that had ordered the fish. That's on the invoice. The warden, the National Trust warden, Bert, the bailiff. In fact, my mate swears he was a carp because when he used to have this big overcoat, he swore he could see a tail coming out the back every now and then. I said, "Stop, go off somewhere." And anyway, it's my big, dark, big plated fish, beautiful fish. Oh, blimey. Nobody, not a dog walker, nobody. Suddenly I spotted him coming along the dam. And he eventually came round, and I'd still got it in the landing net. I hadn't weighed it. I said, I'd seen him before. Obviously, you pay your money. It was day ticket. And I said, I've got one. He said, "Oh, that's a fine specimen." I said, "Couldn't take a picture, could you?" And then he went into one, telling me how in the war he was aircraft reconnaissance, photographic reconnaissance. He got the Nikon in the house, I'm thinking, and of course the days of film photography, so we had to wait 2 weeks. Out of that roll of, I don't know if it was 24, it might have been 12 pictures, I can't remember. You got them in 12, 24 and 36 exposures. There was one that had a complete me and a complete fish in it. The rest was, no tail, all that.
So at this stage,
anyway, that was Agnes Wells.
But you don't know the significance of that strain at this stage, 72, do you?
Not at all.
It fascinates me that the Leney heritage as such was known but to very few people until 80 and beyond.
Yes, yeah, and the significance of
until he finished. In fact, he
was
out of business before people realised what he'd
definitely.
done for carp fishing.
Yeah, definitely. Once this came to light, certainly in these volumes, and we found all kinds of things in there.
We're going to come on to that.
The famous.
We need to talk. We need to talk the famous lakes, and we need to talk the ones that could have been, and the ones that perhaps still are. You know,
who knows?
That's what you know. I definitely want to round up with that bit of magic later on. You know, about what is possible, what is possible. But Chris, before we go back to the yours and Chris's voyage of discovery, I do want to put on record just how little carp stocking there was going on any kind of scale in the UK pre-Leney.
Right. Okay. If you go back to the early 1900s, yes, there were odd pockets of people. One was the Thomas Ford establishment in Caister, up north. He had, in the early 1900s, somehow or other, had found out about this Nederlander Heidemasche, which are the Dutch company. That a rough translation is the moorlands recreation country, because a lot of I went to the land of Leneys last year. A lot of the land is flat and below sea level, so you know a lot of they've encroached into the sea and made the land bigger, he had somehow, and he started to import a very, king carp. In other words, cultivated. The hand of man has had a hand in.
Yes. What was the landscape like in the British Isles pre-king carp?
Right. We had these so-called wildies. Whether we ever had any true wild carp in this country, but they were long, what people, it termed the expression cricket bat commons, long and thin. Some of them grew, big. We had a 20-pound as a record from Cheshunt, which was one of these, that was long. And I mean, the notch above the head, we owe a great deal of gratitude to Kevin Clifford about all this subject, because he completely, with gusto and relish, dug into an area that nobody in the world, never mind the UK, had dug into before, the cultivation of European carp and what it meant, which would ultimately lead us to Leney, which would ultimately lead us to, to the lakes in this. So a lot of the stuff I talk about, I sound very knowledgeable. I've just learnt it from Kev's book. I knew a bit anyway, but he went miles beyond that. It was,
he's got a real scientific attitude to this, a forensic attitude,
absolutely.
Hasn't he?
Yeah. And
and still doing it, Chris.
Yeah. It's a knowledgeable, educated bloke, and who I was in business with for quite a number of years at Carp Talk, and we would talk about monster carp when I was up there. And for instance, he was hard-nosed Yorkshireman, Redmire, I'm telling you, the biggest fish was caught. Walker caught the biggest fish. How often you hear this? When places open up, the biggest ones are caught to start with. I'm going, Kev, come on, you've got people like Hilton later on, they're seeing known for fish. They know them. What about that one there? Don't know that one.
John Carver as well. Not prone to flights of fancy, these guys,
hardly. No, he's... John Carver's a black and white person. There's no grey with John. And there's loads of instances like that. So we used to have sparring, bouts of it. Anyway, so back to it, to the early. So there was Thomas Ford, who had forged a small path to this company, the Nederlander Heidemasche in Holland, who were new at the time to breeding carp anyway. In the late 1800s, this company was involved in everything to do with land, whether it be husbandry, fence laying, grasses, the play on the field, anything like that. And they decided in the late, maybe we'll look at this primarily as a food source, carp, because that's a massive, hundreds and thousands of tons of carp produced every year at the time for human consumption in behind the old Iron Curtain countries, as well as Germany, Poland, and places like that. And anyway, they thought, well, maybe we'll look at breeding carp. And they did it properly. I mean, it was it was quite an organisation. And they had a deputation they sent to, first of all, Poland, and they went to Victor Korda, no less, who had propagated the Galatian race of fish. And these, and they attained excellent growth rates. That's what it was all about. This is what selective breeding was doing, yeah. It nothing to do with angling purposes, to get the maximum amount. And they were very impressed with that setup. They also went to Germany to another famous breeder. This is Ernest von, I'll remember his name in a minute. Anyway, Schreider, Ernest von Schreider, and he was different. He had crossed two famous, historically famous European strains of carp, the Luitzer and the Bohemian carp, to produce a cross. And again, excellent growth rates. They'd won prizes at competitions, and they went there, looked at that, and that was great. Came back, reported, and said, right. I mean, I'm paraphrasing all this. I mean, I wasn't there, but let's do it. So they imported 6 Galatian fish, 4 females and 2 males, and 6 of the crosses. And they put them into 2 ponds. And at the end of the first year, the Galatian pond was a total and utter disaster. There was 175 fingerlings there. The crosses, which were just over there in the next pond along, 4,800 odd. And now there's the fantastic prospect of which Kev and I have talked about. What the hell did the Haidamashi do? Did they just get... Oh, they lost one of the broodfish as well, one of the Galatian broodfish. What do? They get rid of that and just carry on with the crosses? Or did they put the Galatian fish in with the crosses and, producing a Haidamashi special, which some of the people who worked, hierarchy people who worked in the Haidamashi at the time, claimed they had so we don't know. And I mean, and if Kev can't find out, nobody.
Do we have an idea, Chris, what the fish looked like then?
Right, they were quite long, yellow-skinned, quite long. The mirrors, spectacular scaling. Everything from nude all the way through to big plated fish to fully scaled, big scale fully scales, small scale fully scales all over the body. Redmire and Billing Aquadrome, very close second in the 50s, both produced the largest fully scaled, and they're proper fully scaled mirrors, besides big common carp and big mirror carp. So yeah, from that, we don't know what happened, but I don't know, maybe they did go in one pond again. Anyway, they then started to build, these were rented 2 ponds, they started to build a proper Haidamashi fish farm. This was at a place called Valkenswaard, and by 1905 they were up to 125,000 they'd done. The site got bigger and bigger. By the time Leney started visiting in the mid-20s onwards, around about 1930, Kev was telling me that he'd found records that was perhaps 300 acres of water underwater there. I mean, that's how big the farm was.
Do you think that Leney had done his research, seen the Thomas Ford stockings, and thought, I'm going the same place?
Right. What had happened? He had spotted. They had bought the Thomas Ford, the Surrey Trout Farm and United Fisheries. That's where the United Fisheries comes from. They bought a number of. They became successful. I mean, this is supplying trout anything to
Snails,
do anything,
like, yeah.
anything to do with fresh
And
water.
Leney wasn't the boss at this stage, was he?
Certainly not. No. He came in and worked at the Nailsworth branch. Got enough funds to buy a partnership into. There we go. Yeah, but they're a pretty early one. There's the Surrey Trout Farm, Midland Fishery, which was at Nailsworth.
Amazes me that people think Nailsworth is in the Midlands somehow, Chris.
No. I've been there. I've stood by the sign. You've got to have your picture taken by the sign. If you're on the Leney Trail.
What exists at these sites now?
Nothing. At the Surrey Trout Farm, I'll tell you about that later. Yes, there is. Nailsworth, no. I don't think there's any. Again, it was in its day. It was, a reasonably large one. There's some good pictures of back in the, I don't know, in the 1930s. So it was viewed as a holding place where to the west where fish could be shipped from.
So take us back to the mind of Donald Leney, the man who was going to change the landscape of recreational coarse fishing in the country. Why was he interested in carp, and how did he sell that to the business, do you think?
Right, okay.
There he is behind us.
There he is,
obviously an older man at this stage.
Yes.
With the lead-lighted windows, as you mentioned.
That's at Springhead, and that's taken by his son, Michael Leney. He very kindly sent me that picture many, many years ago. That's in the, evidently it was with his first coffee of the morning and the early morning light, and he's writing, I don't know, maybe an invoice out or something like that.
So how did he get the
right? Okay, so they bought the Thomas Ford operation, and he's not an angler, never been an angler, Donald Leney. And he noticed that there were references of importing carp from Holland, from this company, the Haidamashi. And he had a little bit at the time, I don't know why. I mean, he had a soft spot. I mean, Clifford told me this. Yatesy's told me this as well. That was the catalyst, that soft spot for them. And he thought, because remember, we'd only just got over the First World War, 14-18 war. So this is only 5 or 6 years later when Leney joined, and looked at the records and found quite a few references to importing these carp. Right, okay, well maybe let me see if I can try and restart this, rekindle this, which he did, and it grew and grew. The sporting aspect of carp was slowly, gaining momentum. They were, the general press at the time, they were, don't spend your life, you haven't got enough time in your life to go and catch one. If you do, you'll only get a bite on 4-pound line, they'll bust you, yeah. But that was sort of slowly changing, and then it all stopped again with World War II, and but he had supplied many fish, carp up
by that
until
point.
then. I mean, this reference here to 100 king carp. This is dated 1936.
Can I have a look, Chris?
Yeah.
So this is a page that you found latterly, isn't it?
Yeah. It's one that I found in the bottom of the drawer.
It's 90. It's nearly 90 years old, isn't it?
Yeah.
And actually, for the northern angler, there is a record here in 1936 of 100 king carp going to somewhere in Runcorn, which isn't too far from where I grew up.
Right.
I mean, God, it doesn't. The part of the frustration I think we're going to come on to, Chris, is it never quite tells you necessarily where they went, does it?
No, and it was for a time quite a frustration.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you potentially got the keys to the kingdom, but you're getting part of the picture.
That's right. That's right. The doors come ajar, but you
don't have all the pieces.
You're stepping in, but you're hesitating. All the time.
So presumably at some stage, the media influenced clubs' decisions to stock with these new sporting fish, the carp. The likes of Bernard Venables, people like that, would they have been important in the?
Yes, they would. But Richard Walker was
even before Clarissa. He was influential in stocking of carp.
people only in the last 4 or 5 years, Kev found a feature in, I think it wasn't the Fishing Gazette, it was the Something and Something Journal, I can't remember what it was, Fisher's Journal, and it was article by Walker, and early on, way before he became catching a 20-pound carp, for instance, in 1952, he certainly after the war, when he came after the war, he caught 81 double-figure carp. And I mean, one thing he might have gilded the lily now and then, Walker, but he was never a fibber or anything like that. And he had photographic evidence. He was into photographic evidence then. So Walker, though we look at the red bar stock in 1932, we look at all kinds of famous ones early on. You look at the Leney books from 1952 onwards, and where you got trout, newts,
pike,
it's roach, carp. It's page after page after page of carp.
Do you think that helped Donald Leney fly through the ranks of the Surrey Trout Farm to eventually own and run the business? Do you think it was a success with the carp that would have done that?
Oh, without a doubt. The business grew and grew and grew. He became the head honcho in the end. It did very well. I think he bought them for a third of what it cost, a third, in costs, and the other third was profit. But I mean, God, words had it. It wasn't simple.
Well,
as
visionary.
that.
You might say a visionary, because there was nothing in the 20s to suggest that carp were going to be.
Yeah, very little.
And I do want to, at this point, Chris, I'm not going to labour this throughout this, but people might be wondering why this is relevant. Where we sit today, is a fantastic example of what has become possible in carp fishing. Korda is unimaginably successful. To somebody like Dick Walker, I'd imagine. Maybe he'd have known. But we're talking about the difference between a carp scene that didn't exist and one that was flourishing.
Multi-million worldwide.
Yeah, and I think Leney is the link there between a desert, pre king carp, and he happened to be he was the link for me.
No, in a lot of ways you're right. Walker and Bernard Venables, he had of course the Daily Mirror column, very active writing. So was Walker. Walker was starting to write everywhere. The idea then started to form, certainly in the late 40s, that they didn't need 100 years to grow into a monster fish. They were catchable, and certainly when Walker laid down the rules of, first find the fish, don't scare them, use tackle broadly suited, blah, 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 all that stuff. You can change the odds in your favour. It's not in the fish's favour. You can change them. You can actually make a difference. Because before then, people were going, well, no, hang on, what's he on about? You can fish a lifetime, then you'll catch one. And Walker's, no, stop. No, stop. And you can make a difference.
And crucially, that led to clubs allocating budget and carp being stocked.
Absolutely. And there was the man to supply them.
Would you say he had a monopoly at that point?
He had the lion's share. I wouldn't say a monopoly. There were other, nipping around the edges. But yeah, I mean, in sheer people, we're talking hundreds of thousands.
Do you think he
tiny carp?
Do you think he was one of the Haidamash's biggest customers at that stage?
I've never been asked that question before. I would think he was probably up there. Yeah, he would go personally every autumn to Vulcan. He didn't go to Vulcansward. They had a Emst. Just outside Vassen, they had a small, in fact, it's a play park. It's water play park these days. But they had a small number of holding ponds that customers would go. And as I often say, you can bust the myth about him individually going, I'll have that one. No, that didn't happen. What happened...
This was their showroom, was it, effectively?
Yeah. So what would happen is he would generally, if they were available, go for the best growing fish of that year. Very occasionally, second summer fish, but mainly. So
Actually, went for as we know, the fingerlings. That literally what we'd call C1s now. First one summer fish.
Yeah, C1s. So the 4. I mean, this one here is 4 to 4.5 inches. You know, they're and this was in
They're quite big C1s, Chris.
Yeah,
They've done well.
yeah, they've done well. But the red mile fish were 5 to 8.5 inches. They were even better. So some years,
absolute flyers.
you know.
He's buying the flyers then, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. So they've already been graded. That's all I'm saying. And he would go to the pond, and we've got 300 of these left. I'll have them. Yeah. And they came through the rail and boat network.
Love that.
Isn't it fantastic?
How were they kept alive on this journey from Holland?
Well, they would. There was huge, great galvanised fish urns, which I finally got my hands on one.
There's a picture of you with one, isn't there?
Yeah. Many years later, and
there it is, that one there.
Yeah, there we are.
So that would have been what they came in. Do you think?
Yes, it would. Yeah, and it was what they were certainly transported in. These were. I found out later. These weren't English manufactured. These came from the Haida-Mashi. So he purchased many of them, and some he returned. A bit
like shipping containers.
That's it. Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, sadly, that one. This is a picture from 30 odd years ago, but sadly when I came to move when we moved a few years back, it was in the garden. My pride and joy, looking over there.
Yeah.
Surrey Trout Farm.
Was it a planter, Chris, by this
stage?
It was.
It was. It had a plant growing on top of it. When I came to move it, it all fallen apart around the edge. It just corroded. And that day, Ben Tucker, who was with me, he took one as well. And I found out lately that he tried to move it and it fell apart as well. So, they came through the Hooker Holland, straight out into the rail network in this country from, I would think, probably Waterloo, straight out, because it is on the Hazelmere line. I mean, it's fantastic. Kev Clifford found a picture of them handling those urns at a station at railway workers. Work was plentiful.
Were they able to oxygenate these things, Chris?
They must have been. They must have been. I mean, it's a lovely oldie worldie sort of view.
I presume they came on ferries, right, as well?
Came through the Hooker Holland from the ferry. Yeah,
I just wanted to throw that up, Chris. Is that them in use?
That is collecting. They're different urns. That is a drain down. So here they are collecting. You see all the fish there. At the Haida-Mashi, that would have been probably at Volkenswald, when it was growing the business.
Mad.
But yeah, I mean that's the way they did it. Again, there was plenty of employment, people around to be employed. Can I ask,
just I know fish handling would be different nowadays. It's just a curiosity of mine. How many carp would be transported in, say, one of those urns? Because how big would you describe them to someone?
They're probably 3 foot across, and I would have thought.
So not massive.
No, not massive.
No.
Not massive.
Yeah.
I'm guessing maybe 100 fish. Yeah, something like that.
Well, that's mad, isn't it?
Yeah, or maybe more.
Wow.
You got to remember another sort of part of this, which is, really, you half close your eyes and you can see it. I can see it anyway, is that some of the local deliveries, Leney would have made, he had a shooting brake car, an estate car with a trailer, and of which one of those or two of those fish urns would have been on. It's how the Frenchman fish were delivered, probably the Shillinglee fish, possibly the Wagners Wells fish. They were all local. I mean, Michael, his son, told me this. And when I mentioned French Pond, which he'd heard about, because he became a fish farmer, trout, though he did have some carp as well. And he said, yeah, more than likely they were a delivery personally made.
Now, before we talk about the absolute Leney highlights and what made these fish so revered, talk to me about the breadth of waters that he stocked, because they weren't just on local deliveries, were they? We've seen already that's Runcorn, so that's the rail network going north.
Virtually everywhere, right up to Scotland, there are masses of not just the home counties, into Essex, up into Norfolk, Suffolk, way down into the West Country, into Wales, of course, in the Birmingham area. I mean,
well, Somerset Levels is a good, one that bizarrely, those rivers have got Leney carp, or had.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously, Northampton area with Billing and
but
above.
as far as Scotland.
Yeah. Right up as far as there. There's 13 of these volumes, and they were that. I mean, you've got the no carbon required copy, but they were that thick, and there's 13 of them. And they started, I think, in 1926, and right up to really when there's a sort of seismic moment happened in 1956 where the Hyde and Massey were taken over by a government department, and though they were they carried on, things were different there, and Leney thought that the quality wasn't as good, because what the Hyde and Massey, and it's a different world then, but I suppose wonderful disease-free, fast-growing carp. That's what they produced for donkey's years. And though after 1956 he did buy carp from elsewhere in Europe, he never felt they were ever, as good as, the golden years.
So this was something that's crucial, I think, because let's talk about modern day Leneys. I want to do the Frencham story as well, Chris, because obviously that's something that's personal to you, and actually produced carp that were not only fantastic then, but then continued to and lived a very, very long time. When do you think the fingerprints of the Hyde and Massey were definitively gone? Those Galician fish that we all loved the look of, when were they gone from Leney stockings? What was the last date you think that they went out there before it was diluted? You think 56?
Yeah. 56 is a catalyst.
Because Leney went on to stock into the 60s.
Yeah,
didn't he?
I know. Yeah, and he bought from elsewhere. He also bought from the Hyde and Massey, but he felt that the quality wasn't as good as before. Things changed there. When the this government organisation overtook them. So
these fish would have been. So your prime Leneys would have been at best getting on for 50 years old at the turn of the millennium.
Yep.
Because I do want to talk about the likelihood of fish that went through Leney's hands being alive today, Chris.
Yeah. Right. The simple answer to that is that it's possible, because you want me to say there's a crusty old Leney.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Crusty old Leney languishing in somewhere in Sussex.
Forgotten estate lake.
A forgotten estate lake in Sussex, Surrey, whatever. And that could happen. What you'll get nowadays is second, third and fourth generation of the original stocking. But it's never as simple as that, because those waters have subsequently been restocked with different fish, which are bred with the original fish, and everything becomes watered down. So time's running out for sure. And there possibly is. I mean, it's keeping the dream alive.
Forget the prime Leneys. Forget this period up to 56. They're dead. I'm almost certainly dead, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
Fish that went through Leney's hands up to the 60s, though. It's not impossible. Carp live a long time. I don't think we yet know how long they live, especially if they haven't been fished for. Yep. Which is why you mentioned a crusty old neglected estate, Lake Leney. If they've never been fished for, then we don't know, do we?
No.
They could live to, I don't know.
Well,
stories of the Japanese emperors passing on koi, aren't there? Hundreds of years. So.
I mean, dear old Raspberry in Raspberry, it's the...
Redmire.
Sorry, at Redmire, not Raspberry. It was the... it was a bit of a moment for me, because it was the first fish obituary I wrote. I remember telling people in the local pub, they thought I was completely round the funny twist. A fish. I said, no, not a fish, a carp, a special carp. So we can trace exactly raspberry and a number of those, particularly the mirror carp that were left in Redmire, back to, they were either born in 1932 or 1933. We know they were stocked on the 10th of March 1934. So they were either 1 or 2 year olds at the time. And not all of them grew into monsters. I mean, for instance, raspberry was first caught before, I don't know what year you were born, but probably
80.
80, right. Yeah. It was first caught 19 years before you were born, right, in 1961 by John Nixon. It went all the way through, right through the millennium. And it was landed by the good and the great in that time. I mean, at least 20 captures since that first one. I held it in my hands once. I didn't want to harm it, didn't want to catch it or anything like that. Touched it and had a word with it and had a colour with it, weighed it. And it never grew into a true monster. It topped around the 23, 24, 25 pound mark. But some of his, from the same ilk,
I mean, the people that put baits to that fish, included the forefathers of modern carp fishing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I always say to Joe Wright, Carpology, he caught raspberry, and I'm like,
oh, did he? Right.
I just, I don't think Joe. It's only when you remind someone like Joe that he's caught that fish that he's like, oh yeah, it almost forgets. But if I could catch a historic carp, that would be right up there. And he's done it. And Joe's sort of similar age to me. He caught it in the early 2000s, I think.
Yes. Right.
No, that's, I mean, it sounds corny, but literally living history.
Yeah.
Were there fish, Chris, that lived longer than raspberry, do you think, in Redmire? It can't have been the only one from that.
No. The best story I can give you of that, and it's, two sides to every argument. There was one fish, a Lydia, in there, and there was numbers of Lydias in there, and it was first recorded at 2612 by Kev Clifford in the sweet corn era catches, the mid-70s. Beautiful fish, 1 or 2 drops. It's a ringer. You know it. I mean, Lydias often a difficult thing, but this one you could tell. It was perfect line mirror. Anyway, Les repeatedly saw this fish.
This is the Dick Wheel.
Fish, sorry, yeah. You see, that's what I like talking about to you, Rich. At least you got a good understanding. I talk to a lot of people. You can see them looking out into space.
I don't blame them, Chris, because this isn't everyone's cup of tea, is it?
No. Of course it's not. But and I try and make it interesting in the talks and all the writing I do as well, because it is interesting. Anyway, from the get-go, when he became involved in Redmire in 1988, he repeatedly saw this fish and it was caught. And then, much later, way past the millennium.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Chris.
That's
I just found
raspberry,
that online, raspberry from a...
there it is, yeah, and there is...
Tony Long, I think. If that
right, looks like a very... That's an early picture, Chris.
Yeah, quite an early shot. Yeah, it had 1 or 2 on with the head to the left as it is there. You can see those identifying scales and a very prominent lateral line as well.
It's like a birthmark, which Chris gave it the name, Chris, like a little straw, a sort of a raspberry type smudge.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the picture when Hilton caught it, all the bottom part of under the where the pectoral fin is, along the bottom there was covered in red blotches. People said that's how it must have got its name. No, how it got its name is when John Nixon caught it. He had been offered the pair, him and his mate, had been offered a huge bowl of raspberries by the owner of Benithan Court, had come down and said, "Would you like some? Here's some cream." And he ate far too much and had tummy ache. And then he caught the fish out, and and that's John telling me that. I know John. He's in his 90s now, and he so that's how it got today. Anyway, back to the Dick Wheeled linear. Les then started to see it, and I mean, God, he lives 200 yards away, you know. I mean, he knows the place back to. Started seeing it well past the millennium. Say it's bigger. That's mid-40 now. Now, when I mentioned this to John Carver, John said, "Oh dear, Les, what are you doing?" You know, I was there. It died. It got deep hooked by somebody, and I'm telling you, Chris, it was that fish. It was nearly 30 pound, and so you've got that. A fish I caught, for instance, I only caught one. I only made one cast ever into Redmire with a mixer and with a small controller, and exactly 43 years to the day after Richard Walker had caught Clarissa or Ravioli. So it was the 13th of September. This is 1995, and when it came in and weighed it was great. It was about half the weight of Dick's fish. And but I was, you know, thrilled to catch it. And when I got home, I got pictures of Rod Hutchinson holding it in the 70s. You know, quite a distinctive. So there's a good chance that was, you know, quite an old one.
I think my question is, Raspberry was the most famous old carp that we've ever had. Did fish push on beyond that perhaps weren't as recognisable? I think that's my question.
Yeah, there would have been, certainly in the Hilton era, because that's the most, in the end, that's the most important era, because they had so much more knowledge than back in the 50s with Walker. And that, I mean, most of the fish were either died or removed, you know, they were never caught again anyway.
True. Yeah.
Anyway, it was only with the, you know, the changing attitudes over the years. And I have, the best example I can give you of that, and I can remember this not like it was yesterday, but it still slightly chills me when I think of it. When Hilton saw this 4-foot common carp on the Redmire shallows, I think it was in the close, just a few days before the season, I think it was 1973 maybe. Somebody will check up and find out I've got it wrong. It was in the early 70s. This was no fleeting glance of, you know, in poor light conditions of, you know, like I was out yesterday in poor light conditions thinking that's a monster and it turned into 2 fish, yeah, you know, that kind of thing. No, this was just there for ages with that part of its back out of the water, you know, wallowing about in this red mud feeding. And I found out about this, and this is way before it appeared in Quest for Carp. And I mean, sounds a throwaway line, but I knew Dick Walker then, and I told Dick Walker about this, that Hilton had seen this 4-foot carp in Redmire, and he said, he never saw a 4-foot carp in there. We saw big ones, you know, and some of them, who knows, they might have been 70 pound. And, you know, if one had been caught and somebody told me that, I wouldn't have been surprised.
The fish he netted, for instance.
Yeah. The great
50?
big 58.
58 pound.
Yeah, great, but a big distended gut on it.
Yeah.
He said, but we did see, you know, a number of times, you know, outrageous fish, you know, and they were getting their eye in a bit. Now I told, and then I had a word with Jack. So I telephoned him one evening at the time and said, just to let you know that, and that they knew one another. Obviously Walker and they weren't sort of close friends or anything like that. And I said, I've had a word with him, and he's saying he thought it was quite unlikely that, you know, something of that size, a 4-foot in there. all Jack said to me, there was no preamble. All Jack said to me, he said, "I'm telling you, Chris, I saw what I saw. And if anybody ever catches that fish, you can throw away the record books forever." That's what he said. And I mean, I remember a little shudder on the phone. Okay, Jack, put the phone down. Never forgotten that. Quinlan would try and test Jack every now and then after. How long's that stick? He had to admit Jack knew what 4 foot was, right? And Quinlan did see extraordinary fish there as well. I don't know whether he saw that one. I mean, one of the anglers that's still very much around and still top flight angler, Peter Cranston, who was there he was on the same rotor as Quinlan.
Amazing.
And an amazing angler. He came to Swanley the other week. Fantastic. He's catching monster fish still now. He's been up the tree. And, with Quinlan, they've argued up a tree going, well, no, I think that's the old 38. No, it can't be. Look at that, fantastic stuff like that. And he spent a lot of time, like a lot of them did. Yatesy, Hutchinson, they all spent. And Jack, they spent a lot of time up in the tree just looking at them. Can you imagine being confronted in the late 60s, like Jack was in one of the hot summers, I think it was 1970, from a tree he counted 68 carp, which he thought were over 20 pound, lying around. And obviously that one, there was other ones that he perhaps couldn't see. It wasn't a head above a head shape above every other water. It was a whole body in front of any other water in the country. Little wonder that they spent so much time.
I mean, Redmire's crucial to us because it provides a yardstick as to what Leney's could do, and it was one of the very first waters where we've got evidence of fish progressing through.
Clear.
But the next place I want to take us on our Leney trail is Frensham, Chris, somewhere that you mentioned earlier in terms of when you accessed the Leney records with Chris. This was one of the first places that you'd, or perhaps he'd even post-it noted it by the time you got there, Chris.
Right. It's 1952. That's when those. There's 100 fish mentioned, but there were some put in that there's 2 ponds there. The little pond, the big pond. The little one's not, it's probably 30 acres. But the other one's, a considerably sized. So there were some put in there, and I do have pictures of some lovely carp that have been caught from there over the years. But the bulk went, I don't know, 75, 80 maybe. They somehow, those fish, I don't know how, because it's largely shallow. Not that I ever did it, but I have seen people do it, walk across, just about do it.
Yatesy probably could have.
Oh,
he'd have had his head sticking out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he easily done it. But I mean, it was tough,
terrain.
It was tussocks and stuff like that. Anyway, it was largely shallow water. Somehow these fish survived the 62-63 winter, where Frensham, along with every kind of still water in this country, included some rivers, included the sea, right? Around the stanchions at Brighton became frozen. The Thames estuary became frozen. I mean, I know I do hark on about it. I was personally involved in it as well. It completely wiped my local fishery out. Everything, carp, eels, gudgeon, the lot. Were just lying dead when it started snowing and freezing on Boxing Day. It never unfroze till March. That's how, it was 13 weeks or something, horrendous thing. And they thought Redmire had succumbed as well. There was a sort of obituary written by John Nixon that appeared in Angler's Mail, saying that hope it hasn't happened. But, the summer of 63, very little activity was seen, so on and so forth. And the Carp Catchers Club this elite band of Walker and his pals gradually sort of closed down. I mean, Walker was writing the things like the Stillwater trout reservoirs were starting, and he had to write, a weekly column for 30 years on all kinds of fishing. So, he hadn't done carp, but he'd been involved with it quite a while, and he's spread his wings. And members die and stuff like that. It lay fallow for a number of years. At the Swanley event the other week, we had in the audience the man who refound Redmire, Bob Rolfe. And he has donated to the Carp Society Museum at Horseshoe. He took his copy of Stillwater Angling, which was a 3rd edition by Richard Walker, and in the inside back cover, he when they went illegally, him and Graham Eggleston, to find Redmire in Easter 1965, and it was it was a warm Easter, and they obviously didn't go down the exposed road down to the hall. They nicked in over the fence, further down. They appeared on the Redmire shallows, that end down there, and both got up a tree straight away. My God, what's all this about them dying? Look at them. Look at that one. God, that's got to be 30 pounds. Not 20 pounds. That one's even bigger. So that kind of thing happened. He drew on the inside in pencil a map of Redmire and a detailed one where all these fish were. It's another artifact that is priceless. It's a one-off, and as I say, he's donated that. And Redmire was reborn. Hilton went, caught that 35 pound, and
and somehow Frensham survived, Chris.
Right. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So somehow Frensham, I don't know how, somehow survived. There was a group of anglers, young anglers, that lived in Guildford, and I don't know how they got there. I don't know whether they were old enough to drive. Maybe they had motorcycles. I don't know. This only came to light when I was doing the Historical Carp Waters 2 book, where I did a very much updated chapter on Frensham back from the King Carp Waters, which was 30 years before, so I had so much more information and pictures. Anyway, one chap really helped me and even sourced the pictures from this is around the 67, 68 period of mid-double fish, so and bigger, just a 17 or 18 pound. And they removed quite a few of them into the place that I fished early on, Britain's Pond, which is one that got wiped out. They put them in the River Way at Guildford as well. We're talking less than 10 fish, but they did, and it's all detailed in a wonderful log that I was fortunate enough to have. The guy gave it to me and said, "No, you hang on to it." So I mean that's in the archive. So I had that information, but only later on. Anyway, 10 years after that, suddenly these other guys. So you've got Richard Lloyd, you've got Dave, you've got the Jones brothers from Portsmouth, you've got Dennis Smale, you've got a number of people, and they had this to themselves. And great particle era it was, certainly the late 70s. So black-eyed beans, besides sweet corn, black-eyed beans, all kinds of stuff like that. And they started to catch them, which always sort of slightly annoyed me a little bit when we got there a little bit later, and with boilies, because they certainly not one that hovered 6 inches above the deck. In 83 when we got there, all sort of slightly rankled with me in as much as that they caught a lot of these. What's the problem? I don't know, maybe they thought we were going to spread the word, and eventually it all got out anyway. I mean, all right, I was partly to do with that. But so I knew that, and then Chris had, told me about Frenchmen through Leney. I went one day in the summer of '82. I hadn't been there for years. We took our kids there. It's in inland seaside, plenty of sand, shallow water. Still is today. All kinds of misdemeanors go on there, you can imagine. And right in the middle of this large beach area, which is one of the sort of favoured spots, way out, 70, 80 yards out, there was a guy with two rods, little Lafuma low chair, sitting there, I thought, I better have a word with him, And I said, and he was on edge for the word car, I suppose I could understand that. And I said, anything happening? No, not much. I'm after eels, mate. Oh, eels? Really? Oh, yeah, it's good eels. Any carp? Oh, no. Somebody caught a bream the other day.
Well rehearsed.
Yeah, that's right. There's some decent tension here and all that. When I walked away, my mind was full of the fact that he knew that I knew he was carp fishing, right? And I walked away. So that sort of fueled it as well. Finished at Yateley because Yateley suddenly became busy in '82. The word had got out, and looking for somewhere else. Let's have a look. So I went then in the close sea. Chris and I had talked at a NASA, NASG show. We had talked to some of these anglers that Chris thought were fishing there, but we didn't get anywhere with them, and which made me more suspicious than ever. Yeah, there was something up, and I wanted to find out more. In the close season of 1983, I went there, and almost immediately fish were jumping. I saw from various points around. It's quite an open water, and some of these, when they come right out on their tail, some of them would look bloody 3 foot long. Oh, God, look at that! And there's an area you can't fish, which is right by the warden's house. Again, it's National Trust property. And his house, I think it's still there now, his house is on stilts. Part of it is on stilts out on the water. And right next to it is a fenced off area. The fish can go in and out under this fence, but it's a circular pool full of lilies. There's no lilies in the lake, but in this spot there is. Well, you can imagine, it's an absolute end of the southwesterly. Yeah, the southwesterly wind, prevailing winds blowing towards the dam in that direction. And of course, there's a convenient big old tree there. Got up there, and there they were. Wide. God, blimey, look at that one. And they were getting ready, not for spawning, but they were nudging one another. And of course, one half turns on it, so she's big, gee. And of course, I reported back to me two pals who I was fishing with at the time, Jan Wensker and Terry Glebioska. And I taught the pair, I said, we should have it, definitely have a go. The friends helped with bait. We decided to go with boilies. Bob James told us about the Richworth cheese flavour, not the blue cheese, the cheese one. And with Pally with Andy Little at the time, Andy said, look, this is the kind of bait you want to put together. Anyway, and we made loads of it. It was red. 15 or 16 mil, something like that. It's the days of wrist rockets and stuff like that. And Andy said, look, you put in big balls to start with. so they find it, nothing else will do it, and then gradually get it down to. So we did all that, and we baited. And me being the closest, I took the line. It didn't, I wanted to be there anyway to put some bait. And we're not talking about loads of bait, bait. And then maybe Terry would come on the weekend. He lived in London, and Jan lived over at Reading, so they were much further distance than me. First night we tried to get tickets. Magically, they were all booked up. Funny that, isn't it? So we fished the night at Yateley. I caught my only tench out the car park lake. I remember that night. Anyway, we packed up in the morning. It was Farnham Angling Society ticket. We didn't have. You had to book direct tickets, but it was open access. And that day when we got there, I blooming hooked and lost one. It took me completely unawares. This was the days of comparatively early carbon rods. So this was Simpsons of Turnford KM5. This is dual taper, overfit joint, 12 foot, pound 3/4, Cardinal 55s, of course, handmade, bobbins. So we were very ultra cult, I suppose. And this one it just roared off and just got stuck somewhere else, and I lost it. I was working, at the time, so I'd had the first day off. I couldn't fish the following day, but Jan could. And I raced out of London and down there to Frensham Pond, so past home to get to Frensham in my pinstripe suit, pinstripe, a full regalia. I mean, I put boots on probably. I didn't run across in shoes in the sand. But I remember getting there, and he was. I could see Jan there, right at the end of the beach, and he'd started to make. And we all had them, industrial carp sacks made out of nylon, with holes punched in, soft. I mean, they were starting to appear. Nashi and one or two others did them. And I could see it hanging up in the reeds. Oh, God. Anyway, I said, what's happening? He said, yeah, I've caught one. And it's a 20 pounder. Oh, brilliant. He said, but I can't tell you, not sort of look too different to sort of, one's 20 pounds were caught elsewhere. Can you believe while I was there, he had a run. Right, he's on the rod like a jackrabbit, and eventually, it, we get it in. A near double row linear, mid-20, dark, just fantastic looking fish. I think this fish went on to be called Mirror Image. I think somebody will correct me. And it was certainly one of the probably first captures of it. Anyway, and I took plenty of pictures of it. So we were off and running. Right.
I mean, these are the first fish that you now know are Leney's, right?
Absolutely.
And you're able to see them in your hands.
Absolutely. I told Chris straight away. Rang, Chris, you don't believe it. Jan's. I mean, no instant photography then, of course, still in the camera, right? The pictures. But yeah. So here was the myth was now becoming a reality. This was as good as we thought it probably would be.
This is the very first time that the records for you guys have borne fruit, tangibly.
Yes.
Borne fruit.
Yes. It's before Chris started on Wagners Wells.
Yeah.
I could go, I think, a couple of days afterwards, and I've got to run, and I'm there on my own. Richard Lloyd was there, and in came another. They grew to an average weight of about 25 pound, and in came just a glorious bloody fish. Just I'd never caught anything quite. I caught some of the cut meal fish which were Leney fish, which were sort of similar, but this was bigger, right? And Richard Lloyd came down, took some photos for me, and then we started to catch them, and we were using to pop up these little red boilies. We tried frying them. I remember that, rolling around in a frying pan. We tried sticking polystyrene in, and we tried various things to make them a pop up. Right, no such thing as a pop up then. Anyway, and it did. Those did the job, and they were just merely a 6-inch hook length, so directly from the lead, just off the bottom like that. And it came round several weeks later to one of the pivotal moments in my carp fishing career, the 7th of the 7th, 83, 7th of July 83, and the three of us got there. Some unearthly hour in the morning. The place, and it often was like this, it was covered in a swirling mist, the water, like a witch's cauldron, it's like something, and it would stir in circles, and move around. It was quite, you got lost in the moment a bit. But what we could hear that morning, which was unusual, muffled by the sound of by the mist, crash after crash after crash, somewhere out there, and we just lined up, three of us together, 2 rods each, and waded. You can wade to the tops of your waders, so you gain maybe 10-15 yards on the cast, and just whacked it out. I don't know, 2 ounce lead or 1.5 ounce lead. And can you believe it, that day, certainly by 8:30, I was the only one that had a run. I had 3 runs, one after another, and we were all in the sort of same proximity. And the best thing about it was they got bigger each time. It was a 23 pounder, a 26 pounder, and then Terry Gleb's out in the water with the landing net, and he's waded out a lot further than where I am. And he's netted this fish. Jesus, God, this is 30. This got to be 30 pound. And he splashed ashore. I remember Jan and I running down to haul it back up. And this was a fish that had a length from nose to the fork of the tail, 33 inches. So to the tip of the tail, it was 3-foot job. And immaculate. And there was my 31 pound 2 ounces, my first English 30. I call it an unknown fish from an unknown water. So and then my first 30 pounder is a Donald Leney stocked fish.
Amazing. Have we got any pictures of these, Chris? Because you dubbed it Burton on Sea, didn't you?
Yeah, well, Steve Neville actually came out with it. I was standing with him one day, I remember, and we'd hang on until especially in the summer, in the school holidays, hang on until the last minute, and they would just descend in their hundreds, people. And one day, I don't know if we have got a.
There we go.
There's the 30. Yeah. That's one of the other French fish.
Should we throw this one up?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
let's do let's do them both. So this one is Chris, describe this and describe it in the context of the Leneys that we understand as as a classic Leney.
Right. Everything about it just sort of oozes that Haida-mashi fish.
So linear to start with.
Yeah, a linear, not an absolutely perfect line. I mean, the other side was the same. It wasn't unbroken. They're not a perfect line.
Not a zip.
Not a zip. But both sides were unbroken, right? Perfect length to girth ratio. Immaculate condition. Look at the fins. There's not a mark on it. Not a mark on the body.
I mean, the French and fish were not. I mean, the next picture we're going to see might dash what I'm about to say, but they weren't overly deep fish, Chris, were they?
No. Occasionally you get one, but they were, and
this is the 30 pounder. I mean, like a different carp altogether, slightly deeper.
Yeah, slightly deeper.
Huge scales, cluster of scales.
Yeah, big cluster of scales. When Chris Shea, I rang Chris that morning. I on the 7th of July, I rang work first to say I wouldn't be coming into work from the public telephone box, of course, in the village. And then probably about gone 9 o'clock, I thought, I wonder if Chris is awake. I wonder if he's living awake at that time. Because really, he's the one to take pictures, right? God, he answered the phone. I said, Chris, so I blurted all this out. I'll come. He said, I'll come. And eventually he came from the Devil's Punch Bowl all the way over this rough Hankley Common, which was gorse and sand and silver birches. It was largely a downhill journey, but some way on his police bike, Hercules, ex-police bike, and arrived behind the three of us and fell off his bike. And
for dramatic effect.
Oh yeah, well, you never know with Chris. When he did that at the Carp Society show at Wembley, he came down the aisle on it, and he did a dramatic right in front of the stage. Did a dramatic fall off, and I don't know, mate. He was an expert by then. He didn't hurt himself. Anyway, that camera. This is a Bronica. Anybody just put it into Google, you'll see what a Bronica camera is. 2¼ square, high quality lens, produced a negative, a 2¼ inch square negative, high quality. And
beautiful framing. It's composition wise, it's lovely, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's got it all. Horizons level, which is often people forget about. And that had the ability to have two, the back of the camera had a housing which held the film. You could take it off and put another one on, but in that morning he bought 12 exposures in colour and 12 in black and white.
Yeah.
After the following week, he said, he had contacts done of them. He said, come over and have a look at them. There we go, Bronica camera. There you go. Look at that. Yeah, very, 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 very similar. Very similar to that one. Yeah, very similar to that. Viewfinders at the top, so you get Chris looking down like that.
Perfect for cat shots, for getting low to the fish.
Oh yeah. Doing all that. Yeah, that's and an expensive camera. Anyway, when I went again in this house in the Devil's Punch Bowl. And he had them, his contact laid out, and you know what, the black and whites were great.
Mm.
I mean, he did. I paid for it,
Yeah.
I didn't expect him to pay for it. And I had, 4 or 5 colours done, but the black and whites were the ones, and I was very grateful.
Now, Frensham, even beyond your time, Chris, had an enduring appeal for anglers, but it was very much those who. No, if you know type setup, jealously guarded. Dennis Smale and his compatriots weren't the last to jealously guard that lake, were they?
Not at all, no. After the disaster happened, and for people that don't know, I mean, it's been written about extensively, the club stocked with new fish, not fingerlings, but 4 or 5 pounders like that, and they bought something in that these old boys couldn't handle, and there was a massive fish killed the same day from the same batch into another Farnham water. The old resident carp died. So it's more than circumstantial evidence that the root cause was, some viral problem.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was dozens. When the ice melted that winter, this happened. The very first fish that died was that one, not the 30 pounder, the one before we just showed. And it's a pivotal day. Talk about being naive. I was there in the big sandy swim, and I didn't even realise Ron Buss was there. And Ron came down. He was fishing up higher up. He said, "Chris, I've had a fish come in on its side in the ripple, and it's come into the swim." And he said, "I can't see. It's alive. I can't see anything wrong with it. But hang on, I'll come up." As soon as I got up there, straight away I knew it was that one. Thought, oh my God. Anyway, I remember Ron standing out we looked at it. I mean, I'm no expert at what a fish looks like under the skin. You know, there was nothing coming out of the vent or the gills looked inflamed or something obvious, right? There was nothing like that. And I remember Ron standing out in the water with it between his legs, keeping it upright. Ages, 15 minutes, something like that. Nah, every time he let go. And then eventually the gills weren't moving. And fortunately, it was taken away and set up. And that now resides at the Carp Society Museum.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ironically, the 30-pounder, which died in the fish kill, that was mounted as well, and the Carp Society have that as well. So when I walk into the museum, those two fish that were just in there, including my first 30-pounder, UK 30-pounder, are there. So Ron and I thought, just one of them things. That's a terrible thing to happen. Beautiful fish, But then I remember Andy Little going, and somebody later. This is a good pointer as well. Fella come along the bank. There's a bloody great pike out there, dead. And of course, when Andy went up to have a look, it was another one. Another carp, and then another one. The ice came after the ice disappeared. It was just littered with them. It was. We were very fortunate in the Thames Water Authority, which several forerunners before the EA. The regional manager was a carp angler, Andy Thomas, and still about now. I've met Andy only a few weeks ago. And he was in charge. So to have a carp, and they had a depot in Guildford. And he was, obviously he was hugely worried about it. Several fish were taken away for analysis. And I got there one day, this is in February 1987, and the warden, Cyril Jollins, who wasn't an angler, he'd been there all the time we'd been there, he started to take an interest because we showed him he'd come along with his dogs when we caught a few carp. He was, gradually taking much more interest in the carp. I got there, parked there, and he come running out of the house. He said, they've taken 3 carp, Andy Thomas, the TWR, taking 3 carp away, alive, in a state. And one of them, Chris, has got those big scales all over its body. And this was, not that I got anywhere near it. Steve Neville caught it. Several people caught it. There were a couple there, but this was the much bigger one, a big 20. And he said, yeah, they've taken. Well, I knew where they'd taken them to, the depot at Guildford. So I lived in Guildford then, and I got there before they closed up. And just very briefly, they'd put them in an antiseptic. All 3 fish had gone into an antiseptic dip. They'd taken them out, and in the back of that premises, there was several tanks. They were probably 15, 20 foot wide. They were on bricks. If you stood there, the edge would come up to your chest. And it was dark. And Andy he said, they're in this one here. And one of them, straight away, it was listing. You could see it in the middle. The other one was sort of still in the corner. And I thought, well, where's this fully scale mirror? And then just here, right tight in, couldn't hardly see it. And I remember shining the torch on it. It was this black brooding fish, just laying there, absolutely. And then, the sort of rage started a bit then, and daft things like, please God, don't let this one die. Stuff like that was going through my mind. I mean, it had a hold on a lot of people, including me, this place. And that was a Friday. On the Saturday morning, I said to he said, I'm coming back in the morning. So I said, can I come to, so I met him there. went down, and both the other ones were dead. They were both dead. Some kind of viral problem. The fully scale went away. I took a picture of Andy with it, dead, like inside the building, about to go in the freezer before being sent off sort of on the Monday morning. So there was that going on. It finished me off for a little while. I'm not saying I stopped carp fishing or anything like that, but it was a very dark period for sure. And crazy, isn't it? You make your own luck, I suppose, after a while. That terrible black cloud had a silver lining. It forced me to Raisbury, forced me to Longfield, forced me elsewhere, and things happened. And then I lost interest. That £30. I was there when it was dragged ashore. That first £30. It was heartbreaking, as you can imagine. And I never went ever back to fish. But they didn't all die.
No, this was the thing. So how quickly were you aware that it wasn't a wipeout?
Right, okay. Probably within 2 or 3 years, because people occasionally had by then either telephoned me and said they caught one, and I'm going to send you a picture, and blimey, it's in that album. Yeah, it was a little bit bigger.
Were you starting to recognise these fish?
Yeah, without a doubt. I have the Frencham album, which I don't often look at these days because it's like an epitaph, really. But I think in there, I did look at it the other day, there was something. These aren't my captures. These are me and other pictures I've filched from other people. There was at least 51 mature carp in this album.
Pre-kill, yeah.
Yeah, pre-kill, yeah. And to over 30 pound. And I said, oh well, maybe not. And then it looked as though there might be maybe a dozen, something like that.
So those dozen, Chris, were they the nucleus of the stock that was to captivate another generation of anglers? Yes,
they were, because though a lot of these introduced fish survived, they didn't die, and grew on to be big fish. They were so much different, than these other ones. You got people having a go for them that then didn't want anybody else to have a go.
And this is a little bit about this is touching on the spell that Leney could cast, isn't it? The way people felt compelled to guard these fish from outsiders, and people had trouble about it. I mean, it's no secret. Mickey Gray's second book, he writes about the trouble that he had over there.
Right.
Passionate anglers wanted to protect what they had, and among those fish were fish like the mirror image that you talked about being the first one you saw. We've got a picture of that one, Tobe. I mean, how old would that have been at this point, Chris, do you think?
Right, well, let me see, 83, so 52, 62, 72. So that would have been 31 years old at the time.
So that shot
there, go back.
Up. There
we go.
So you've called it the best of the best.
Okay, it comes from a feature.
Yeah. But it's apt, Chris.
Yeah.
Because can you just tell us about this isn't a capture, is it? So
No. Now, what happened, I think this was 2013, the National Trust had organised a netting to assess the stock, and this and one or two others turned up. I mean, it had been caught since the disaster. I mean, we're talking a long time after the disaster now, and it had grown into, a big fish,
I mean, that's up to 30, I think, in the end.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
maybe even £40. I'm not sure.
Over £35, certainly. But there was other ones there that did.
The long fish, certainly over 40.
Did attain £40.
I mean,
but the biomass was so much less.
Yes.
Yeah, more grub.
But that combination of long, authentic Leney fish that did £40 as well was quite something special and fairly rare still, I think, Chris.
Absolutely.
These aren't fish that grew big everywhere, are they?
Yeah. No, not at all. And when I became friendly with Dave Jones, and they were there very,
He's
very
written
early.
a book. Is he the guy that he wrote the book?
Romancing the Carp.
Yeah.
Yeah, a fantastic book. I recommend anybody to go. It's out of print now, but you'll find it on eBay. Romancing the Carp by Dave Jones. His whole complete Frensham story, besides his other fishing, but the whole Frensham story is in there, including going back after the disaster and seeing fish, thinking, hang on, whoa, I'm going to have another go here. And eventually, he caught them. And I though I sort of emailed and correspondence like that, I was there the day the book was launched at the Carp Society conference. I went down with Dave very kindly. It was Keith Jenkins had published it through Freebird. Yeah. And do you know what Keith did for me as well? Talk about, it's all to do with this aura around this Leney thing, I suppose. He said, it's coming, the book will be out, so I'll make sure, and we're going to have a launch. Tell me all about that. I said, well, blimey, I'm only coming back from holiday about 2 or 3 days before the conference, but I'll be there, don't worry. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get, there's one here that we've just had bound up. See what I'm going to send it to you so you can read it when you're on holiday. How about that? And he did.
Amazing, yeah.
And I've got it still.
It must be a source of some pride, Chris, that you are you become the go-to guy, haven't you? In the sense that anything like Leney related, for instance, people have come to you, and that includes, Chris, can you tell me if this is a Leney, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I do get that from time to time. Messaging or emails or whatever, and with accompanying pictures. How
often do you find that do you find a little train of something in there? There's actually a shred of truth to it.
Yes, there is. That has happened as well. Of which I am sworn to secrecy by. For God's sake, don't. But I'm quite willing. The gamekeeper, blah blah blah, and everything seemed to stack up. Right? Did you find anything in the Leney book? No. Sometimes I did, but mostly no. But there's traits. Yeah, but all right, okay, there's traits. Yeah, but and then you get stories like I don't know. I met a fella in a pub in Horsham. Remember, he was so excited about this water and bought some pictures and said, right. He said, right, this is it. This is the estate. This is the farm where the pond is. And Henry Wilkes, his brother, knew the gamekeeper, and the gamekeeper's son, and it's a great convoluted story about and they were Donald Leney fish. And I was saying, right, okay. No, I never found anything in the book. They might be, who knows? But it's very much if but and maybe. Sometimes there's clear. I mean, I've had fantastic success sometimes when I had these 6 or 7 volumes, which were the carp years ones.
Yeah.
These were 1950s. When really he was selling hundreds of thousands of them, and as opposed to nearly 20 years before, there was just a reference to an address,
or a name,
a delivery,
Yeah.
or an invoice
Yeah.
address. He started, when the business really took off with carp, he started then writing across the Ruislip Angling Club, the blah, 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 the Loxwood district, which was great, because that gave you, something really much more tangible to sort of get at. And I helped a guy in Belper, right up north, and found the reference, the very reference to the very lake that he was, and pretty early, I think late 1940s, everything stacked up about it. And I obviously photographed it, and I sent him a copy. He was absolutely thrilled. I can remember another one that was that was a very unlikely area near Dungeness. There was another one out there, where would that be? Norfolk or Suffolk. I remember that one. I remember one in Hertfordshire as well. That was a brilliant one. There's no fishing now at this lake. They lost it, and it forms part of a golf club. And the 16th hole, you have to tee off over this lake. But in its day, and I mean everything all stacked up. So it's all not lost, but that is the unusual bit. The vast majority was no.
Sorry, no.
I'm sorry, I can't find. But that doesn't mean anything, because, for instance, it might have the secretary's name or the treasurer's name of a club, and he doesn't actually live, in Basildon. Yeah, he might just live, a little bit further out. So, I remember looking, especially with Chris to start with, we were probably reading a bit too much into some of them, we were just guessing.
Do you wish you'd done more? Do you wish you'd followed up these things quicker? Because obviously Frensham, grabbed you, and you weren't able to then sort of follow up these leads.
Yeah, the other one, I mean, the first double figure, for instance, the first double figure carp, subsequently, obviously, first double figure carp I ever caught in 1961 from the Tarn at Cut Mill. As there's several references in the Leney's book in the 30s to buying 100 king carp, 6 to 8 inches or whatever in there. I was thrilled to find out about that. I found another one, right? And this one was dramatic. Oh, gee, was this dramatic. Looking with Chris, we said, look at this. That's unusual. Army, the British Army. I don't know if it's the British Army. It's something Army. Well, hang on. This is not far from me when I lived at Frimley. And I went there and looked at it. It was on our army property. It's the base and still the base of the 8th Royal Engineers, which is an amphibious group of men. There was a massive concrete hard that went down into the water. It's called a hard, about 100 yards long of concrete that went down into the water, so the amphibious craft could go. It's a serious base. Now, same period, this 80s, so same as Frensham was going on before the disaster, and I went there and got in all right. There was no problem. Big, well, not so big then, but it grew bigger. There was a boating fraternity there, so there was a boating base, but army everywhere and tape everywhere and restrictions and so on and so forth. It's the time of the Troubles in Ireland. This is so, like most places, we were barred exercise. There'd be a gate across the road and there'd be a red flag or something or other up there. I remember sometimes getting there early in the morning, going, couldn't go in. I got arrested there once, or my car did, because there was an area. It was an area where it was a long walk from the car. And I went to bait up, and I thought, well, hang on, if I nick down this side road, because it's all fir trees and what have you, and if I could get close to there, and I did. I mean, I admitted this later when I was, in the guardhouse. I did try to hide the car. I did. I put my hand. I tried to hide it in there, and the water was only like 30 yards away. I came back, and there was 4. At each corner of the car, there was 4 military police, complete with guns. Airshore vehicle. It's a restricted area. You realise that. Do you know what was in the car? My rod bag. Could have been a bazooka.
Like a mortar.
Yeah. I thought, oh, God. Anyway, I Then one of them came in the car with me, and the other ones jumped in the Jeep. I had to follow them to the guard out in front of the adjutant. You know, I'm just a lowly carpenter. I just and you know, I got a ticking off.
Yeah.
Late for Sunday lunch, I was as well. I remember that. I got a proper ticking off, and of course, I never did it again. Anyway, I went there and I saw a massive disturbance out in the water, fish jumping. Could have been a pike strike, and I didn't see it, but I knew it was going to be a carp. And that started, and then brought in Jan again, and we started catching these Frencham lookalikes. Beautiful, heavily plated, long, beautiful looking carp. And I mean, hardly touched.
And the sort of principal among those fish was the one that made the front cover of your book, Chris.
It
did.
I've
got a picture of that one, Tope, actually.
Yeah. That was a pretty notable fish, in as much as that I didn't fish so much there when suddenly Raysbury and
that was it.
Yeah,
between the two, the next one up, that one.
There you go.
Incredible, Chris.
Yeah,
incredible.
Oh, fantastic.
I mean, just on this one, right? Before you carry on with that, this is, to anyone who doesn't, you know, if you're watching on YouTube, that is creme de la creme Leney, isn't it?
It is. It was certainly top of the heat there.
Unbelievable fish.
Yeah, and possibly at the time the largest fish in there. Big old lake. Nobody had floated fish there before. Certainly not in any shape or form. And that was caught free lining on a 9-foot fiberglass rod, my little old Mitchell reel, in the tightest of swims. Nobody had looked. It transpired nobody had looked under this canopy. That the place was surrounded with rhododendrons, and there was and lots of places it hung right over the water, and there was, you know, a canopy, you know,
like a cave underneath.
Yeah, cave underneath. And I mean, some of these passages were made by the army when they were on manoeuvres, and I just bothered sailing thing. I just went down one because when I was over the other side, I packed up and a fish jumped right on the outside of this canopy. I looked over, I thought, blimey. I thought, when I go, I'll just go and have a look. Anyway, I followed my nose, you know, ducking down. Suddenly, I'm at the water's edge, and I mean, there's like 4 or 5 foot of water. And because it was bright that day, because it was in darkness, the water from outside was illuminated, and it, you know, it was. You could see right into the water. God, you know, along comes, shit, look at that, you know. I had to go, but came back, you know, within a day or so. Thought, right, throw some mixer out there. Anyway, I started to catch 1 or 2. Good ones, you know, over 20 pound. Then I occasionally went then, but then Raysbury got under my skin, and then Longfield and went back in 91, okay, and looked again in these areas. This was towards the end of the season, so when we had a close season. So the 14th, this particular day is the last day of the season. The day before, I'd gone into not the first passageway, another passageway, which was equally as tight. And I caught one, an 18-pounder. It was the only fish there, and I managed to, you know, it took the hook bait, and I managed to get it out. So I went the last day of the season. I remember sitting in the carp room and looking out. I'd not booked a day off, but I'd done work in the morning, and I left in the afternoon. Obviously, the daylight was, you know, sort of 4:30. It was starting to, or the sun was going down. So I tried to get over there. It's probably about 2:00 or something like that. I went down this thing, and there was a few fish about, and I bided my time. And this thing came in you know, I mean, it was twice the size of anything else. It looked twice the size of anything else. Blow me if it didn't stop and take some mixers. I thought, right, okay, get in position. How the hell am I going to, you know, because you got, you know, I had a very tight, specially made, it's the way I have nets, not unlike the Springbow that's just been announced here, but very tight end, a Steve Neville, right, a tapered handle, obviously made a glass, but very tight, because, you know, there's lots of places. I was doing a lot of stalking. It's not just floater fishing I was doing, or sitting behind rods. And it was handy to have something like that. Probably a round net would have been even better. But you know, you're trying in your mind's eye, you're thinking, what if, you know, and I do, how the hell, you know, am I going to do this? So I waited. There was other fish taking just here. I mean, free lining, you know, little 9-foot rod just like that. And it came in, took a few bits, they went out, and then unusually, it would disappear but come back in the same. It came from the other way. Gee, right. And there's some bait there that was lodged up against some roadie branches that were just in the water, and it was a big mouth, you know, sucking it. And anyway, I got a hook bait right in front of me and took it. And it was World War III. Hung on, and you know, in short order, I managed to net it. And then I was in real trouble, because how the hell do I, you know, I managed to, I mean, it was so tight. I took Mike Starkey there a couple of days later, and he refused to believe that this fish had come out of this spot. And I said, I promise you, Mike, it did. And I managed to collapse the net, and somehow or other, you know, this poor old fish, he was all right. I mean, it didn't get damaged, but managed to get it all the way out of one of these tunnels. I had a mobile phone then. I've had a mobile phone since 1989, believe it or not. I've had the same number.
No.
Hang on, the same number, except for a 0 that was added 10 years ago. Still the same number. So 1989.
Brilliant.
And it's in my pocket now. And not the same phone, same number. And so I rang Andy. It's Andy. I'm a fair old photographer. Andy, you got to come, you know. Blah, blah, blah,
It looks low light as well. Like you've got your work cut out here.
Oh, no. I had to wait. He was going to Shantyco or something like that to follow. I can't come. Oh, jeez. Because he lived quite close to me then. He said, well, I'll tell you what, it's just like Raisby. He helped me out at Raisby, rang Anglers Mail. The nearest correspondence that they had was Graham Pullen, right? He was a fair photographer. And he lived at Church Crookham or somewhere like that, in the locality. And they said, right, we're going to send Graham. And then he rang me, and he said, right, he says, I've heard of it, but how the, you know, I said, just, he arrived. I then phoned my eldest son, who was able to drive then, and he came, and they all appeared together, but this was like an hour later. We reweighed the fish at 31.5 pounds. When I weighed it, it was 31.5 pounds originally, but we reweighed it at 31.5 pounds. And Graham Pullen took a load of pictures for me, which I was very grateful. And that fish went on to become a 40-pounder. But, and we haven't got time. We can't
talk about this, Chris.
We can't talk about this. We haven't got time to talk about this today in another water, but it did go on to be. So it's another genuine Leney. That's a 1955 baby.
Yeah. So I have been lucky enough to see the. I mean, again, we can't name the individual, but I've been lucky enough to see those pictures, and you know,
of that fish.
Yes.
Really.
So such a rare beast. I mean, just seeing that again there, your picture then has cemented in my mind that is at the top of the tree for me. Better than the Frencham fish. Right. Which is quite something to say. It's ridiculous, really. I mean, it's splitting hairs. It's what you like, isn't it? It's whatever you like. But that is quite something, that carp. I want to continue this theme with the best of the best, Chris. Like, what are what are the best leanies that this country's ever produced in your eyes?
Right. Well, obviously some of the red mile fish were just staggering. Some of the billing fish were equally, untouched, unknown carp, first captures of. Again, it grew to well over £20 and over £30 in the odd case. Some of the electricity cut at Peterborough fish were fantastic.
Sort of similar to always reminded me of Savay fish, the longer
they're
torpedoes.
They're some fantastic fish there. The Savay ones, of course. I'm trying to think.
But your top three, like, what would your top three? Absolute creme de la creme leanies.
Okay, that one's got to be somewhere near there.
You can't have that because it's yours. So, I mean, to be honest, you could make a good case for any of those big Frencham fish that ended up being, the top of the tree.
But Pit 4 at Farnborough, now that's the other one. Again, when I lived in that area, close to me. It was forbidden fruit for people like me. I couldn't get in there because who I was or whatever. I've been blackballed, right? I couldn't get in there, but it didn't stop me going in there,
right?
I mean, you see this guy, and you're listening to him, and people listen to bloody hours of stuff that I've done in the past, thinking, he's clean cut image. No, I ain't like that at all. I'm a stroke puller like anybody else. And only twice in my life, carp fishing life, have I snapped. In other words, I've done something completely that I wouldn't do, and it's a total impulse thing. It involved leany fish each time in two different waters.
Love this.
Right? Once was at Frencham, this tree, I'm telling you, when I think about it now, I shudder. I'm a vice president of the club these days. I mean, I shouldn't really be talking about this. But this tree in that forbidden pool with all the lilies in, on November the 5th, 84, 85, something like that, I looked in there and they were there. And I had... I'd packed up, I'd been fishing, but I still had my stalking gear in the car as well. And it was starting to get, it was not dusk, but the light was going. And of course there was hardly any lilies there.
I presume Cyril wasn't home.
He was home because the lights were on. Oh, gee, you don't know how dangerous this was. I mean, it's a covert operation, unbelievable. So I came down the tree and it's like premeditated murder. I then went to the car and got my rod and a bag of mixers and my net. And
it wasn't even impulse. This was, you had to go back to the car for the
it's totally and utterly planned, the fire, was in my eyes. And I came back, I waded out, threw some mixers just by hand out in front. I thought, I couldn't really see them properly. And after a minute, I just lost it and just threw a 3-line mixer into the middle of it. Oh my. And it crashed, because there was no pads, it was crashing. And I was obviously on a tight line. I'm looking at the house. The back door's not there, but it's only just round the corner. Anyway, and I manhandled it in the net. Trudged to on the bank like this, poor flipping fish in the shallows there. Nothing's happened in the house. God, thank God for that. Right. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move it in the landing net onto the fishing side of the fence.
Obviously,
yeah. There's a little spot right by the fence there, and I put it in the water there. And I thought, right, I'll have to just get some. I weighed it, 26 pound 4 ounces, beautiful fish, long, the perfect, another perfect Frencham carp. And can you believe out of the gloom came Steve Neville trudging along the bank, right? I didn't even know he was there that day. Hello, mate, how you doing? Oh, gee, you got fish? Oh, I never told him. And Steve, great, can you take some pictures, mate, you know? Yeah, we got it out. Oh, what a cracker and all that. And I said, I just got a video that year. So it's 86, this is just before the disaster. And everything had to be videoed. I said, look, I've got a plan, Steve. If I go and get my car, bring it round, there's a little metal road that went round the pond, or some of the pond. If I can just bring it along there and then come down the slope, I can, on main beam, I can get the lights on there and we get, yeah, okay, mate. Yeah. Anyway, so I got the car, did all that, and it's half on the road and shining down. And Steve very kindly took some video, he took some still, and suddenly there's another car suddenly pulled up next to mine on the road. I mean, we're only talking about 30 yards away. Suddenly, Steve's gone, it's a fuss. And suddenly this voice said, wait, what's going on down there? There's torch going around, there's headlights down, and there's two blokes by the water's edge. And this policeman's come down, and, the classic ones, what is that, cod? No. No, mate, this is what are you doing? Well, I've just called it. Of course, he shouted up to Harry in the Panda car, hey, come and have a look at this, Harry. Bloody, come and have a look at this. Jeez, you'll never believe it. Anyway, they came down, and they were great, and they saw pictures being taken. But do you know what? The bugger still made me move my car. He did. She took after to move that car. Can't have it there.
Could have been worse, Chris. You could have been doing bird for poaching, couldn't you? So,
absolutely. or some. Anyway, I wrote about this in one of the Paul Selman books many years later. Very much in the vein that I've told you now. Sort of, I snapped. Something happened. I was very lucky, and it all turned out well. And obviously there was a graphic description of all the bits I've told you about, including the warden's house on stilts and all.
Yep.
Do you know, what's his name, the illustrator he used?
Pete Curtis.
Pete Curtis, thank you. Pete Curtis. I got the book. He's only drawn it. He's drawn, and they're
so
with
like an admission, basically.
Hang on, with a no fishing sign, right. Stuck in. I died 1,000 deaths. Anyway, I raced over. So when Steve Neville had a little shop at the back of Tackle Up in Fleet, and I raced over to Steve. I said, Steve, in all the years that passed, I'd never told him the truth.
You wanted to get ahead of the word, yeah.
And of course you can imagine, no, you didn't, you bugger, something like that. And I said, look, it's in this book, and I did tell I was worried, I was still a member, but I did tell the secretary, it's a long time ago now, Mm-hmm. So that was one. The other one, which comes into the top 3 leadies, is Pit 4 at Farnborough. Now, this was a syndicate water that had been stocked with fish from Hawley, where the 31.5 pounder caught. They had been caught in the late 60s, like big doubles, and put in several waters in that area, but including in this Pit 4. And they'd grown and prospered, and hardly anybody had fished for them. And Raisin Brothers, the big tackle shop in the area, it was a Redlands excavation, so Redlands controlled the fishing, but they let it out to Raisin Brothers, and I didn't see eye to eye with the Raisin Brothers, so I was never going to get a ticket for there. But I got a ticket for the next one along, Pit 5. And fished there in around that same period, 84, 85. And I fished with Andy Littles, one of the few times, though I did fish a bit with him in Frensham. I mean, in one, I'm a left-hander, and in one swim we could fish together. In other words, sit in the middle. He got rods that side, I got rods this side. And I remember looking at him and watching him, real chance. I mean, we're talking, and getting bites, but really looking at him, what is it? Now, his dexterity with tackle was pretty good, but I mean, I'm no slouch. At Frensham, occasionally, his long-distance casting, which he was very good at, occasionally he would reap. He was better than me.
But he was like top rod at Frensham, wasn't he?
Yeah, but hang on. He just, at this place where we, we're both working before work, leaving at 8:30 in the morning, he just got more bites all the time. We had 3, I mean, it's not like you and me, and we're sitting together, and you're Andy, you landed 3, and I landed 3, but he lost 3 as well. Right? Or it was always like that. I wasn't catching nothing, and he was catching loads. It was... Anyway, we had there an unbelievable set of circumstances, a water that nobody knew about. There weren't monster fish in it, but there were some lovely fish. We had the hare, and we had tiger nuts. And that combination was, in 1 month period, probably going twice in the week and maybe a Saturday morning. I've got detail, 99 doubles we caught, a pair of us. It was just, 2 fish in the same net and all that. Anyway, I thought, well, hang on. I always put mixer out wherever I'm fishing. And long fingers, islands, these. You can only fish on one called Plank Island for obvious reasons. The access was across the plank, but the other ones were out of bounds. They were long thing, I don't know, 60, 70 yards long, some of them. Heavily wooded. And the end of Plank Island, you were fishing to the tip of the next island along. And I put some mixer out, and the natural drift would sometimes take it down the channel where you couldn't see it, and there's ripples coming back, right? And I mean, all right, could be birds, but no. I'm thinking, right. I said to Andy, I'm going to come 1 or 2 afternoons when in the hot weather, have a little creep around. And what I found, there's nobody there. Within that much of the tops of my waders, I just managed to gain access from the bank to the next island along. It was only about 10 foot wide, but just enough freeboard and clamber through the bushes with just a rod and reel net. And there was a steep slope in front, and then on top, it's quite sandy. It was gravel pit, obviously. And when I looked, in a safe haven for them, again, it was another situation, Pandora's box, And I then started catching some 20-pound, only because I could target individual fish, And now, on one of these hot afternoons, I don't know whether I caught anything that afternoon, with nobody about, I went not along the River Blackwater down to the car park, quite a long way to the car. I looked at the end of Pit 4 and I thought, well, there certainly weren't any cars when I arrived. I thought, I don't think there's anybody here. I'm going to go around on the railway side, and followed the track along. Can you imagine being confronted by this? It's little wonder I snapped. In a slight ripple in a windward corner, they were like pigs at a trough, just lined up. Some of them gill plate to gill plate. As I rounded this corner, just 20 fish, a lot. Up and down, looking at the bank. Gave him 2 pouch slides, come down in the ripple, and I snapped. Snapped. Again, I tried to see, hang on, is one going to separate, a better one? Maybe I can.
Could you see the big one?
No, I didn't. No, that's a fair question. No, I didn't. I mean, a lot of my stories have a grain of truth in them, but I've been truthful. No, I didn't. I would have loved to have seen it. Not that day. I had seen one or two other good ones. So, and after a short space of time, I'm flustered and panicking now. If somebody should come along, and I just slung it out. Anyway, I'm in. And all the other 19 fish raced out of the bay, except for the one. The number 20 was the one hanging on the end of the line. I've actually got it in. I thought, Christ, maybe it's a 20. It wasn't. It was just under 20 pounds. And I had primitive remember the little Gardner thing that you could use?
Screw into a bank stick.
Screw on a bank stick. I had that, and I got some shots. And
you did it properly then, Chris, didn't you? You didn't just poach it. You got the shots as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because often, especially stalking around, I'm on my own.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got some pictures, and got away with it. Nobody in the car park, and that was it. And all was forgotten. I told Andy about it, but that was that. Except some months later, fail. I used to do the BCSG regional. I was the regional organiser for the Surrey Middlesex region at Staines. Used to have it in the pub, the Crooked Billet. And somebody must have taken me that night, in the car. I wasn't driving. And the booze started to talk. And I blurted out that story I've just told you.
Yeah.
As a gag. Do you know they got all the way back to Graham Rolls, the head of Redlands Angling, and one night I had a phone call at home, and it started off with, "Is that Chris Wall?" I said, "Yeah." It's come to my attention, "You have me," and "never darken my door again." And I got all the way back to him. Now, fortunately for me, after that, he emigrated. He went to Australia. I mean, within a year. So sort of Peter Broxup never really got to hear about this, as I never got in Savay, right? I mean, Pete wasn't happy with me being in Savay anyway when he realised, "You're not going to do that. You're not going to do that chum mixer, are you? Don't like it. Never liked it. People do too much gathers in the corners, encourages the rats." And I'm dying on the end of the phone. I'm trying to get a season day ticket, £40, right? And this happened. This did happen. He went quiet. I said, "Oh, Pete, well, maybe, And he said, and there was that kind of pause. He went, "Right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to write you this ticket now. Don't let me catch you doing it." And he never did. No. Because, I mean, in the meat market, he was, when I'm creeping around in the daytime, floater fishing, he wasn't there.
Let's pop up a picture of the Pit 4 fish, Tobes.
Yeah, so there is this chap, only died last year.
The last picture, I think.
Yeah, it's the last shot. Pardon me. Yeah, John Aldridge, that is. He went by the name of Oscar. That's John Aldridge.
Sorry, Oscar Aldridge or John Oscar?
No. His name is John Aldridge, but he went under the name of Oscar. I think it was Len Arbery that did it as a sort of OC car, which turned into Oscar. Obviously, he was a member of the syndicate. This fish had first been caught by a roach angler on the 15th of June, the day before the season started, because Pit 4 Redlands had noticed the loophole, as did Graham Rolls at Oldbury Hill. That was another place that did it. Loophole that allowed you to put a few trout in and call it any method fishing. Of course, people just carried on just fishing. And it was caught at 37. It was the largest carp of the year, 37.5 pound. Dennis Langley, this chap's name was, and I was in Raisin's shop on the 15th of June that year buying a few bits, and somebody raced in the shop saying somebody just caught a monster carp, in Pit 4, and people rushing around getting scales and that. And I mean, John Raisin knew I'd heard. He sort of clocked me before we went racing out, right? And it turned out to be that. And it made the papers and what have you. And then it was caught. Then, I mean, that looking fish at that size in the mid-70s drew the likes of Quinlan, Clive Dietrich, Len Arbery, quite a few people. Bill caught it at £34, a little bit down. It was caught several times, including by obviously John Aldred. And then sadly, when Keith Kaiser caught it, and he was the right-hand fishery man in that area for Redlands, he caught it again at a big weight, well over £35, and it died in the sack. It was mounted, it was nicely as it happened, and it was displayed in Raisin Shop for many years. And in fact, it's still, now they moved to Gold Valley, it's still, I believe it's still there in that case. So it is, you can stand in front of it, look at the majesty of it.
And what, Chris, makes this a Leney that's worthy of particular note?
Perfect shape. Everything about it is just perfect. Those big mirror scales.
Huge, aren't they?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, big. The other side was the same too. Just everything.
Where can you see a shot of that being held more conventionally, Chris? Are there shots?
Yeah. There's let me have a think now. Hang on. The Quinlan shots that I've got are a Hilton shot, so not necessarily.
I mean, did
like
people
that.
not hold them like we would now back then?
No,
so
not so. I'm just trying to think when Clive caught it. There's. Just trying to let me think, because there were several these Hawley fish. There were several of them grew into over £30 that were moved, and I've got pictures of. I mean, one was a firefighter. I'll remember his name in a minute. He landed 2 different 30-pounders from there. One, I don't know why Steve Neville keeps cropping up all the time. Steve Neville somehow got in there with his mate. I don't know how he got in, but he got in there and fishing there. He caught a few of the fish. And this chap came past them and he said, "Are you doing the night, lads?" He said, "I'll be here in the morning. I'm just going up here to bait up." And they laughed because he showed them a can. They sort of giggled a bit. He was just going to bait up with a little can of sweet corn. Anyway, he went on a cat and it appeared next day. Gee, within an hour or two of being there, he came down to Steve and they said, "You couldn't come up, could you?" He caught one of these 30-pounders.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that water again, it had the correct biomass. It could grow the food that produced big fish, like a lot of these places. In the Save, if you look at that valley, the Blackwater Valley, where I used to live, Pitford and all.
Is it worth pointing out, Chris, that obviously the quantities and energy richness of bait that we now see introduced, these fish didn't benefit from that, did they?
No, not at all. No, in fact, if you look at most of the places I've mentioned, right from going back to Redmire Billing, the Tarn, Hawley, Frensham.
Got big with no bait, and these are huge framed fish. The skeletal structure.
They had the ability, these Galatian fish or whatever they were, the Leney fish, to growing in length, and then the fluctuation of the availability of food, health of the fish would then determine whether
just how big they would go.
How big they go. I mean, it's not that like the the squat, high-bodied fish wouldn't make a big fish, but they didn't have that length, and this is where some of the Redmire monsters, if you like, this is some of them long ones suddenly, had the ability to pack on weight, and on that kind of frame, you got a really big fish.
Now, we're coming towards the end of this, Chris, and I want you to indulge me a bit. Let's talk about the prospects of there being a fish. Let's talk about in more detail the prospects of there being a fish out there somewhere that passed through Donald Leney's hands that is huge or alive at the very least. A big Leney carp. Is it possible?
In my mind's eye, I'd love it to be possible. And I've studied the subject extensively. And that's all I can say. I'd love it to be possible. And who knows? Time, it's a long time now ago. And what you're going to get now, if they have not had any other stockings, you're getting second, third generations.
Yeah.
Which, can be fantastic as well. But the likelihood of those happening are very because places get stocked again.
Indulge me. A Leney fish stocked in the 60s. Obviously would have to be about 70 years old probably to still be around, which is possible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible.
What was the very last stocking, do you think, that Leney made?
I think it was, I've been asked this question before, that passed through his hands, not necessarily a Haida-mashi fish. I think it was 76. So
more than possible. That wouldn't even be that old, but in carp terms now.
Not really, no. But you and me have got that fixation in our mind. They possibly are not like that, right?
No. The last of those fish, do you think, are gone?
Yeah.
Even the romantic in you, Chris. You're being pragmatic here. So I need romance from you. I need the idea of some mistake. Let's look at the a bad example because these are all gone. But the Monster Myths Lake in Passion for Angling.
Well, yeah.
That is everything that those journals should have led you to.
Yes, without a doubt. That I was a tiny little bit involved in Passion. Tiny little bit, and obviously I knew the pair of them very well while it was going on. That all happened in the Mayfly pub, and that is the pointing of into the Leney. That is well, it makes no odds now. Wimborne, St Giles, right? That is it, and they found it. And sadly, some years ago, Harry Teasdale, the keeper, died, but. There's that classic line there. Well, what kind of size were they? Well, I got to be telling you, they got to be reaching somewhere across the size of me Labrador across the back, and stuff like that. And then standing up on the roof of the Land Rover, it was great. I mean, you talk to Chris, you talk to Bob, not necessarily two different stories, but you have got the romancer and the slightly more, I wouldn't say sensible, but slightly more...
sort of more pragmatic, isn't
it? Yeah. Look at it. And they did see one or two sort of real good ones in there. Harry's Monster, I don't really know. It was fleeting glances.
I've spoken to Chris about this.
Yeah.
Not a particularly... what would you say, like a definitive sighting?
That's exactly what
enough,
that's what
for
he
him
told
to
me.
believe what.
Yeah, that's right. It's exactly what he told me. Lovely end to that one. I can tell you about the Harry.
Before we should point out, obviously, having said where it is, Chris, that they're all dead. There was a disaster, wasn't it? I think they did the dam break.
Yeah, and also otters were around as well. Yeah, so a combined, of losing water and predation. Yeah, finished it off. Which is the reason I mentioned the name anyway. Now, lovely story. When the King Carp Waters book was launched, which was in November 1993, not like today, a grand, book signing at the Land's End pub or wherever. I had a little party at home on the launch of the book. It came, and half a dozen people I invited who had helped me. Mike Starkey, Harry Haskell, God rest his soul, Chris Sanford, and Bob and Chris, who was still friendly. Only just finished the filming in 92. So it started in 89 and finished in 92, right? Now, when they arrived, they came together, when Chris and Bob arrived, Chris came in and said to me straight away, he said, before I go tonight, Christopher, he always called me Christopher, before I go tonight, I must show you a picture. I've got a picture here for you. Oh, right, okay, Chris. Anyway, hours later, and I've forgotten all about this, they're going, and he drew out of his pocket a picture of a 26-pound common, beautiful fish, and he said, I went back to the Monster Myth Lake this summer, got a day, and I, baited up the sweet corn, my float roasted away, and keep that. And he gave me the picture, and obviously it's in the special album. That was, that's probably the last fish that was maybe caught from there.
Really?
Maybe.
An ancient common with white edging to the scales.
That's
I've seen the picture.
Where's that shot? Yeah.
Yeah, dark.
That's
dark
it.
Fish.
Yeah.
But, in my mind's eye, there are still places like, I know it's remote, and it's probably just pure romance running away with me, but I think anyone who grew up in that era, Monster Myths was the very top of the tree in terms of what might be just out there somewhere on some hidden estate that Leney once stocked, and the records aren't definitive. Sometimes you can't tell where they went.
No.
So I don't know. I'm going to pretend, Chris, that there is some hidden amongst some roadies somewhere deep in some woodland and forgotten estate.
Yeah.
Much like Chris did when he was prospecting for lakes. I'm going to imagine that there's an old Leney that probably, let's face it, is going to live out its entire days without ever seeing an angler.
Quite possibly. When I look back at and we talk about things like that, it more than ever, I mean, I'm not a youngster anymore now, more than ever, I'm just so glad I was in that umbrella.
That era.
Of when it happened. And I did, catch some of these incredible fish,
and like you described it, Chris, those records were surely like a Pandora's box. All they did for us was to sort of draw our attention to just how much impact Leney had. But for you guys, I like to imagine in that moment, you could have been looking at a book full of Radmeyers.
Absolutely, yeah. It was. I remember. In the low light of that kitchen, I remember the first time I went when we looked at it, and Chris was thumbing over the pages and where he marked, where he'd put these post-it notes, and suddenly we were carp mad anyway, the pair of us. Caught the largest carp in the land, for God's sake, and to have access to this when virtually nobody else did at the time, though it told us in the end, comparatively little, didn't spoil the euphoria of going through there. I remember, touching those pages, and I borrowed from, when I was researching the King Carp Waters books in the late 80s, because they were bequeathed to Chris in Donald Leney's will. He died on the eve of the Great Hurricane in 1987. And it was only some weeks later Chris found out that these 13 volumes, and he got them. I can't remember if he went there or whatever. And within a year or two, I said I can borrow a few of these. I'll do research, and I got to tell you, I had them for a long, long time. In fact, I had them so long, I was thinking, I hope he's forgotten. and it was only then when Mark Walshingham, who held high office in the National Trust at the time, embarked on a project to find out where Leneys were on the National Trust, and they do figure in there. That and obviously he contacted Chris, and Chris has said, "Well, hang on, yeah, he's I can't remember how many. Anyway, and I remember I did a slideshow in Bournemouth at the football ground, or just by the football ground, and I passed them over to. He came that night, Mark, and I passed them over. Not begrudgingly, but they left my hands and went in a plastic bag, and they went over to Mark, and he's been through them with a fine tooth comb. So I think he'll give them back to Chris at some stage.
What do you think Leney would think of what's grown up around those carp in the intervening years?
Be totally and utterly amazed. I wouldn't say so much about the fish themselves, the business. And I mean, this has happened well within our lifetimes. I remember promoting carp fishing abroad in the 90s, for instance, going to Germany. I went with Maddox once. I remember promoting, went to America, appeared at ICAR. I worked at ICAR's, which is at one of the big shows in Florida. I went with Ray Dale Smith. Can you imagine? Me and Ray Dale Smith let loose with a tab, unlimited tab. Oh dear. And there's got to be effigies of me with carp on the screen. I'll leave you with this one story. It's a funny story, but I suppose, how highly revered we have been talking about this last couple of hours, and the greater carping community out there hold in high esteem, and certainly at the top of the peak of these Leney fish. That 4 or 5 days this show was. One day, a chap came on there was an agent that had done this stand, and he was promoting tackle for carp fishing, which was comparatively rare then. And he introduced a guy on a stand, an American guy, a youngster, but he had 4 or 5 tackle shops. And he said, Chris, I'd like, could you just run through, some of the stuff? For instance, Ray Dale had his tank, of course, but they'd hardly seen PVA. And it had ramifications, certainly for catfish fishing, of, putting ground bait very close to the hook bait. And I remember many of them just, good grief. Is it environmentally friendly? Yeah, it is. Yeah, all that. Anyway, so I gave this guy, I think his name was Terry. I gave him the 5 bob tour, around this is a carp rod, Leslie's carp rods, around and the whole thing of that. Anyway, and he sat down with the agent, and the agent was going to go and see him the following week, Came over to me as he left the stand. He says, Mr. Ball, I want to shake your hand. He says, thank you very much, because you are helping me and my customers to stack those carp up in the freezer. Thank you. I mean, the blood drained from my face, and I'm thinking, my God, he's stacking them up in a freezer like freeze blocks, on how to catch them, because I mean they eat them out there, and of course the bait, chunks of carp for. And I remember that happening. That's happened. Well, that's over 30 years ago. And I mean, Fox have tried really hard to get in there. I mean, Korda, and it is happening. It is. It's a vast market. I went to Canada 5 times, 4 times with Paul Hunt. Again, into the 90s. I first went with Bernie Hayes, who was expat, who lived on the St. Lawrence and was doing tour. But then I went with Paul afterwards. And, somebody asked me for a picture the other day, which I found. It's going to be in a feature. He'd seen it. I'd published it somewhere, but it is a classic shot. I'm standing on a rock high up, quite high, 6 or 8 foot off the water. And it's against a light background, so I am in dark relief with a rod hoop round, and I have just hooked in the mightiest 1,200 miles, right, a river with millions, not thousands, millions of carp in it. And I've picked up the rod and the rod's hooped round, and I've got no idea what the hell's grabbed hold of it, you know. And that is right back to the Frensham days when that bobbin went shot up. What the hell's grabbed hold of this? We didn't know, you know. I mean, they're not in the clubhouse all round the wall, you know. I mean, where I'm fishing at the moment, they're nobody knows, and that's great. I mean, they're not monsters or anything like that, you know. But you know, I'm getting close to 30 pound on this water, but you've got nobody knows, you know. And so you can still do that. You know, I mean, people come in and say, no, people like you are ruined carp fishing. You've written too much about it, made it too popular. I say, you ain't looking anywhere near hard enough, mate. There's places about. And who knows, somebody like that could fall into that one water we've been talking about.
Well, Chris, you know, if it's not you and it's not me, then hopefully it's someone out there. But thank you so much for coming in and sharing your wealth of knowledge about what I think is, you know, one of the most fascinating strains that we've ever had. So thank you very much, Chris.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks.
Cheers.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.